Hi, Dr. P here to talk about something that I wrote about quite a while ago and proved to be very popular, so I decided I would make a video for it. All I needed to know about games and game design I learned from Dungeons & Dragons. Now, I'm not the only person who's thought of doing something like this, but this is my version of it. And compliments to Robert Fulghum, whose poem, All I Really Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, has inspired it. So I'm going to give you a list of what I needed to know, so to speak, and then I'll explain each item in the list. Keep in mind this applies just as well to video games and sometimes more as tabletop games. Many people have written, especially when Gary Gygax died in 2008, that D&D has been a massive influence on video gaming. Here's the list. And I'm not going to mention each one of these now because I'm going to do them individually. And you can see there's quite a few. So, you don't need high-level technology to make an immersive game. Immersive meaning you feel like you're there. You're immersed in the game. Sometimes something that somebody has called techno-fetishism has dominated the ranks of AAA game makers. And that's the idea that you have to use technology to make the appearance of the game as realistic as possible in order to let the players feel like they're really there. I think this partly derives from the fact that originally all of the video game designers were in fact programmers. You had to be a programmer first, you also designed the game, and you did the art, you did the sound, you did everything. Well, it also comes from the notion that programmers feel that video games wouldn't exist without programming, and of course they wouldn't. And they tend to forget tabletop games and then think, oh, well, programmers are the most important thing in games. Not so. In D&D, tabletop D&D, we could feel like we were really there, and we might have nothing but a board and some two-dimensional pieces or maybe miniature figures. Some people could do it with no props at all, and they would still feel highly immersed in what was going on. It's the game, not the technology, that counts. It's also true that you don't need the latest version of the game. And we've seen in video games a trend to making games that have 8-bit graphics or 16-bit graphics and retro stuff. People are beginning to realize that games are what's important, not the technology. I still think that the first edition of Advanced D&D is the most playable and enjoyable version of the game, even though we are now to version 5. And of course, if we want to take a life lesson from this, we don't need the latest technology to thoroughly enjoy ourselves in life either. You see people spend 20 minutes trying to use or acquire the latest technology when doing the job the old way would only take 10 minutes. They have wasted their time. For human psychological games, as opposed to computer-mediated challenge games, players enjoy the journey, not the destination. When people play single-player games, they tend to focus on the destination. Their objective is to meet all the challenges and beat the game, and then they stop playing. In Dungeons & Dragons, there's no destination. There's a journey that continues until the campaign ends or the player quits. And that can last years, a dozen years, 20 years. I know somebody who says his campaign's been going 30 years. And life, of course, is the same way. It's not he who has the most toys when he dies wins. It's he who enjoyed life the most wins. Because when you're dead, that's all there is. You're dead. Some people want to be told stories, others like to make their own. Dungeons & Dragons is very flexible. It's kind of a bridge between storytelling games and games where the story is not important, it's the game that's important. So, some referees like to tell stories through the game, which is what I call leading people by the nose. Clearly, I don't like that kind of thing. Others like to set up a situation, may have specific objectives, or maybe the players even figure out their own objectives in the contents of the greater campaign, and then the players work out what to do. They make their own story. I like that, and in particular I like that because if I try to predict what the players are going to do, I'll often be wrong, and that's true of any referee I know of. Humans are unpredictable. So let them do what they want to do and instead of trying to force them into particular lines. And in life, of course, I prefer to make my own story, not have other people decide what I ought to do. The objective is to make players think their characters are going to die, not to kill them. I've known referees who got hung up with holding up the side and would feel bad because the bad guys didn't do very well. They didn't make a really good showing. Those referees forget the point. The point isn't that the bad guys do really well, it's they do well enough to give the players a scare, have the players think they might lose, and then the bad guys lose. Now, of course, if the players really screw up, maybe the bad guys will win. We all like to improve. D&D was one of the first major games, if not the first, to include experience levels and continuous improvement. It was one of the first to include lots of interesting individual loot. All of this lets the player's character improve himself, and that's a major objective in many, many video games. Think about it. Even the term levels apparently comes from D&D, and it's used all over the place in video games. And of course, even old farts like me who get senior discounts still like to learn and try to do better. Another lesson from D&D, user-generated content enriches a game immensely, and D&D was the perfect platform for user-generated content. Monsters, magic items, scenarios, adventures, world settings, character classes, and a lot of this was published so that everybody could use it. Now the lesson for video games is that company-generated video game content generated by a studio is getting more and more expensive as the technology gets better. So studios need to find ways to allow the users to modify the games and increase everyone's enjoyment. You know, level editors, things like Little Big Planet, lots of other things where the users generate the content, and there's a lot more of the content available to everybody to use, more than the company can possibly afford to generate.